I don't have my gavel, so we're going to call it to order. Roll call, please.
Chairman Maturo,
Here.
Linda Schwartz,
Here.
Rex Sims,
Here.
Robert Bornstein,
Here.
Jeffrey Lewin.
I would like to welcome Board Member Jeffrey Lewin. We welcome you with open arms. We're glad you're here. Thank you.
Thank you. My privilege to serve.
You want to read this, Deb, or you want me to read it? An ordinance of the City of Bonita Springs, Florida, amending the Bonita Springs Land Development Code, Chapter 4, zoning, to update the thresholds for developments of city impact, providing for conflicts of law, severability, codification, scrivener's errors, and modifications that may arise from consideration at public hearing, and an effective date. Green sheet number 2106-120. An ordinance of the city, an ordinance of the City of Bonita Springs, Florida, amending the Bonita Springs Land Development Code, Chapter 4, zoning, to amend Section 4-898, permitted uses within the Bonita Beach Road Corridor, Overlay District, Section 4-868, uses for the Downtown Form Base Code, and Article 5, Division 26, Parking, 6, Division 26 parking, providing for conflicts of law, severability, codification, scrivener's errors, and modifications that may arise from consideration at public hearing, and effective date 21-06-121. C, an amendment of the Bonita Springs Land Development Code, Chapter 7, Environment, Natural Resources, and Marine Facilities, Structures, and Equipment, Article 8, Dock and Shoreline Structures. 12. I'm not doing good with Roman numerals today, am I?
Well, I just want to try to interrupt you. You don't have to do it at all, so I don't know why Debbie is sending you on this path.
You're on a roll.
But you're doing so good. I didn't want to stop
I'm
you.
going to keep reading.
Yeah, just go all the way down.
John, you ready?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
So this morning, you do not have any cases before you, but you do have 3 potential code changes. These changes are being brought to you because through the course of events and thankfully us learning a couple of lessons here and there, we have decided that our code either needs to be modified, amended, or somehow clarified. These are those 3 areas in which we are looking to do that today. They have been lessons where fool me once, shame on us. We're hoping not to be fooled twice. So that's why we are presenting these to you. I believe that if you propose these are adopted and City Council adopts these changes, we will have a more efficient and clearer code, and believe that these are definitely the way to go in terms of how we enforce our rules going forward. And I would expect that probably for the next couple of months we will continue to see more code changes, because we are seeing some different events, we are seeing some different things that are exposing our code in a different light, and that different light is causing us to look at it in a different way. So changes in clarity are going to be probably a continued effort for at least the next couple of months.
Okay,
So
thank
with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll leave it to those that understand these changes.
you.
Good morning, Chairman and LPA members. My name is Jacqueline Genson for the record. As Mr. Dolmo explained, I have a presentation that's going to include the 2 first agenda items. The first one being developments of city impact. And really your purpose today is, your role is to go ahead and review these changes and determine if they are consistent with the comprehensive plan. So that's just statutorily your charge today. So I haven't been in this facility yet. Is there a way to dim the lights a little bit, or can you see this okay?
We have it in front of us, so
Okay.
we're good as long as the public can see it. And
Perfect. So developments of city impact, what that is this is a carryover, if you will, from Lee County Land Development Code when the city incorporated it in 2000. So what a development of city impact is it's essentially uses based on a certain threshold require plan development rezoning review. So what we're proposing here in this instance is, the first change is non-commercial schools require a review of development of city impact. What we found when we've analyzed our conventional zoning districts is that in most cases, non-commercial schools are only permitted by special exception. And in some instances where they are permitted by right, the threshold is 100 students. And in a case when there are over 100 students, at that point they require plan development rezoning. So we feel that there are some duplicative code requirements in that instance. And the standard of review The differences between a special exception review and the plan development review, there's only two factors, and really that's when you have a deviation that you need to evaluate. So we felt that the protections in place for the public are already encompassed in the special exception process. So really to have this duplicative code reference was not necessary because we felt those protections were in place. That's the first change, is those non-commercial schools. The second change is really a codification issue, if you will. So in 2017, we went ahead and reordered the use activity group numbers for healthcare facilities. We added a healthcare facility group 1, and because of that, the numbers shifted. And so with that, this specific section of the code was not changed. So we're going ahead and addressing that now. It's just to show a numerical change, and it affects nursing care facilities or outpatient facilities with 50 or more beds. But again, it's a codification change. So that's the scope of that specific amendment. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer those for you.
Anybody have any questions?
Yeah, is there anything in the pipeline that's coming up now, either in the non-commercial schools or the healthcare field,
We
that
do,
these would affect?
not necessarily. We do have 2 non-commercial schools that are going through a special exception process right now in terms of healthcare facilities, again, because it's what we call a codification error. It should have been caught in 2017.
Rex has one.
No.
Oh, no? Okay.
I'm just showing you.
Okay, thank you. Any questions?
No.
Okay, thank you.
With that, City Attorney, do we want to go ahead and take a motion, or we want to wait?
Yeah, this would be, all we're looking for today is a motion that the proposed ordinance is consistent with the comprehensive plan.
I'll make that motion.
I'll second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Great, thank you. The second agenda item deals with, again, some changes to Chapter 4. And the reason why we had to break these out is because the statutory requirements and advertisement requirements. So the first item had to be advertised a certain way. This item, because we're changing the list of permissible uses, had to be advertised a different way. So we have 2 different ordinances affecting the same chapter. So in this instance, the first change is our form-based code. We are updating how places of worship are permitted in certain transects. So that's the first change for that section. If you have any questions on that, I can answer those. The second change is our Bonita Beach Road corridor overlay use changes. So in that table, what you'll see is there are some changes where we either added new uses that were not in the code in the first place, or we went ahead and changed some uses that may have been allowed by special exception or permitted, and we modified those. And then we also went ahead and prohibited some where we didn't think that they were appropriate. And that stems from this overlay being in effect for over a year. We've also had several pre-application meetings. We've had several use permit applications. Those are building permits, occupancy permits come in, where we've had the ability to look at this code and evaluate whether or not uses were appropriate, whether or not uses were missing. So that is really the scope of that. So I went ahead and listed on the slide in front of you today, kind of identifying those specific uses where there are changes. So your animal clinics, your kennels, pet daycare, we went ahead and modified those. So again, I'm trying to read the board. If you want me to go through those specific uses page by page, I can, but the uses that are listed on the screen in front of you are those where there are changes. And again, with the Bonita Beach Road corridor, those amendments were created based on studies by Tool Design Group and DPZ Co-Design, where you have 4 different zones along the Bonita Beach Road corridor, and these changes affect those zones. So would the board like me to elaborate at all, or keep going?
Yeah, and would you like her to
I
elaborate?
just, would that involve page 26? I'm a little,
Let me get there.
this new form here's kind of got me a little.
And Member Sims, can you let me know, because my page numbering is a little bit different.
Okay, well,
The charging stations?
Yeah.
Parking lot.
Okay,
How about
for the
the-
parking, okay, I'll get to the
Okay, let's
parking.
just-
Yeah, that's fine.
okay, the thing that is kind of amazing, under F on page 26, is electric vehicle charging stations shall be screened from view from any abutting right-of-way with the exception of alleys. So we're gonna hide these dudes. I don't understand the philosophy here.
Sure. So what we did in this instance, we went ahead and researched other jurisdictions within our area that have these types of regulations. This one came from the city of Punta Gorda. So in this instance, and even when we had a petition for the racetrack fuel CPD maybe 5 years ago, where they also wanted to implore electric charging stations. And I think as the technology emerges, we'll probably get a better handle on it. But until we know architecturally how these are designed, and we do have some regulations here that address that, it's more so how do we approach the aesthetics. So that is the intent of that regulation, is to go ahead and make sure that we're addressing those, whether it be through landscaping or
It
orientation.
sounds like what we're trying to do is make it difficult for people who have electric vehicles to find one of these things. Let's make it as difficult as possible. We should have a neon sign with an arrow pointing down, hey, it's here. But this is a coming thing. It's going to be here quicker than you think. And I think we need to do everything within our limited power to endorse this, and things that throw rocks in the way don't seem to be endorsing it. So I think this is kind of a dumb thing, section F.
This doesn't limit signage or anything else that would prohibit people.
There's standards in here for what signage should be there, for warning labels, and how to contact a provider if there's, a deficiency with the unit. I would say most instances in our parking lots, because of the way our other codes read, you're going to have landscaping anyway. In most cases, we have, so along road frontages, we have what we call type D buffers, right? So that's a landscape hedge that has to be grown to a certain height and maintained. And most charging stations that I've even seen, for example, I know I've seen them in Collier County, they're really not that tall. They're probably maybe 3.5 feet in height. So I don't necessarily think that this would be an issue, but I'm definitely open to recommendations by the board to look at this further if that's your choosing.
Can we hear from John for a minute on this, please?
Is John an expert on?
Yes, he is
Okay.
for the city.
Good morning again. Basically, our code has adopted the philosophy that we look to have things kind of blend into the natural environment. And in terms of infrastructure, we don't want it standing out. We looked at FPL, the solar lights, probably about 10 years ago, and the way that those were very apparent was not something that was appealing to the council at the time. So what you're looking at is really nothing more than the ability for another piece of infrastructure to try to blend into the natural environment, trying to keep that small town feel to this. If this is not something that this board feels is appropriate, I don't think it really impacts the way this is going to be addressed one way or another, because as Jackie was saying, we landscape the boundary of these projects in the first place. So if you're going to have a parking lot that's interior to a site, the boundary and perimeter of that site's already going to have a landscape hedge around it. This would basically put one or two pieces of landscaping in front of each of these charging stations. They'd be visible internally, but they'd be a little less visible externally.
Okay, so this is in line with the new design philosophy of the city, and electric charging stations are not being singled out.
Correct. It's just another piece of infrastructure, and when we looked at infrastructure, we look at trying to kind of blend it in. We do this if you look at some of the newer transformer stations, everything that you're doing in terms of infrastructure, we try to kind of have some sort of landscaping soften it or kind of blend it into the environment either through color or appearance. And this is consistent with that philosophy.
Is there any curtailment of the charging stations?
Not as I read it. The idea of the charging station is the charging station. I know that there are charging stations that are about 3.5 feet tall. I know that Tesla charging stations are a little bit taller. And I think that there's going to be as Member Sims outlined, this is going to be something that expands exponentially over the next couple of years. And as it expands, I think that there's going to be different companies, there are going to be different car companies, and just charging companies that are going to come forward with their own design and their own thoughts on how these stations should appear. Some of these designs, I think, we're probably going to be very excited about. Some of the other designs, maybe not. This treats them all equally across the board. And when you're in a site, they will be visible. Externally from a site, we're looking to kind of blend it into the environment a little bit more. So those are my thoughts on the matter. I don't know if that answers your question, Mr. Sims, or...
Well, I don't think it encourages the use. I'm all for encouraging and making it as easy as possible for these things to appear. Now, the original ones that came out were not a thing of beauty, but the modern ones nowadays look just like a parking meter, and we don't plant any hedges around the parking meters. So I look at this and say, we want to make it as convenient as possible, and I really, in my mind, every new building that goes up should have in the mandatory that there would be so many charging stations available for their employees and so forth and so on. So I think it's something we need to improve our scope on, and I don't think this is a thing that improves it. I think this is kind of a detrimental thing. That was my thought.
I think that we are at the very infancy of this technology, and I think in 5 years it's going to appear very different than it does today. And I think that the only goal that at least from my perspective, is that we don't want to put ourselves in a position where we feel like we got off on the wrong foot. So we don't protect ourselves, or we don't have something in place to address changes that are going to be inevitable in this market.
But you already have or created a new section which would address this parking needs analysis.
And I think that you will see more of these changes coming up in the future as these things advance. This is what we know today. And what we know tomorrow is going to be different than what we know today. And what we know in a year from now is going to be the same. So we're seeing this today. You're going to see something else coming up in the future, because this is going to be something that needs to be continually updated as technology changes.
It's a living document.
It's a living document, yes, sir. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
And just to supplement, when I was doing the research on the electronic vehicle charging stations, there was one jurisdiction that mandated the provision of those facilities, and it was based on a certain size of a shopping retail establishment. And again, if that's council's pleasure, they're welcome to do that. We put language in here about encouraging this type of facility. We did not put in any type of mandate. If council feels otherwise, we're happy to look into that further. So with the parking changes, I know we jumped right into the electronic vehicle charging stations, but so with the parking section, what we did is we added some language for existing sites that were more so underparked. So it's sites that probably were developed before we had these supplemental regulations for parking. And what's happening is a lot of sites are coming in for ADA upgrades. And when that happens, the dimensional sizes sometimes might take out required parking. So we wanted to go ahead and provide an administrative option for sites to go ahead and do that, because we definitely want sites to come into ADA compliance. So there's language in there about that. We've added language about on-street parking and for downtown, because that was not in our code. So that's added as we continue to redevelop downtown. We've talked about electronic charging stations. We added design requirements to incentivize the use of compact vehicles, also scooter parking, again, addressing multiple modalities of transportation. We went ahead and added more language to help with low turnover parking designs. That gives our engineering group some more regulation authority to go ahead and review those sites and putting owners on notice, if you will, for how they should maintain those sites. We went ahead and added language for joint use of parking lots. That's current language in the code, to allow it to occur more easily. We definitely want to encourage the sharing of infrastructure between property owners as long as it's safe for the public. And let's see, we added language about uses not specifically listed. That was missing in our code. And then we add the language on the parking needs analysis. And what that stems from is we were finding in a lot of some of our multi-retail tenant buildings that they had uses that had different parking peak demands. And the code doesn't really provide us any guidance on how we handle those situations. So again, we don't necessarily want a property owner to overpark a site, add impervious surface when it's not needed, and the data suggests that you don't need as much parking. So we established a methodology to go ahead to review and evaluate those situations. So that's the scope of the changes with the parking section. If you have questions, again, we're happy to answer.
I have a question. Am I the only one?
No, I have one also.
You go first.
What's the city's attitude on the continued use of non-paved temporary parking areas in downtown area? It's a mess at times, as I'm sure you know. What's the city's thoughts about that in the future, presently and in the future?
So this Land Development Code Amendment was staff initiated. I don't know if council has given us direction to evaluate that. Obviously with the downtown parcel, there are discussions about how they get it out for proposal, for redevelopment, but that's not the scope of this amendment request. And that might be a better discussion for the council. I understand they're planning to have a workshop for downtown, which would encompass that parcel. Otherwise, in our code, we do have regulations regarding temporary use of parking lots.
We had discussion last meeting about the possible misuse of certain areas by businesses or residential areas in the downtown area. And of course, eminent domain does not allow you to take that area and give it to another developer. But what about taking some of those areas which are really a blight on downtown or the potential downtown and using them for either a park or a parking lot?
We can definitely bring those ideas and suggestions to City Council at appropriate time. If there are areas that you definitely have noticed or observed that to occur, I can also coordinate with neighborhood services on those concerns.
Okay, Rex?
Okay, page 35, I just have a question here. It's meeting halls. And the minimum requirement is 1 space per 100 square feet. So I take this room, for example, and I count the ceiling tiles. I think we've got about 1,600 square feet here. So basically, we needed 16 parking spaces for this room, but yet there's 50 chairs and plus the other people here. That's not adequate.
Right, so this section of the code is not proposed for amendment. We are in the process of trying to obtain a copy of, the Institute of Transportation Engineers does have a parking manual. So we can go ahead and see if there's updated data that suggests that a higher parking ratio may be appropriate for a use such as this. With this site in particular, I don't know the specifics behind how City Hall attained this site, but this site, as I understand it, was originally a bank.
Yes.
And then when it was purchased and repurposed for City Hall, I'm not sure how the parking situation was evaluated. But again, I think from a practical standpoint, the city's not always fully activating this room that would necessitate the parking, and they are looking at options to go ahead and partner with neighboring property owners.
But the neighboring property owner, when this place is full and they're parked over there, he comes over and blows a whistle and says, I'm gonna have everybody towed that's over in the
Post office.
in the post office. That's happened to me a couple times here. So the shared parking doesn't work every place.
I
But
understand.
that's not the argument here. The basic concept is 100 square feet for a meeting room. The most dangerous part of coming to a meeting here in the evening is when you got to park across the street and you got to walk across 4 lanes to get here. They have the sheriff's deputy in here, but they need the sheriff's deputy out there getting you across the street. That's a hazardous occupation to come to a meeting here. So there's something that we're we've done a beautiful job on this building and everything, we're doing a rehash here, but they don't fit.
Yeah, and also, we heard a petition about 2-3 months ago where we had a development agreement for the property just to the east. And part of that agreement contemplated entering into a shared parking agreement to address those overflow issues that you speak of. Because the city does realize the concerns with parking availability where there are some high-profile items that are heard before council, so that they are aware, and we're trying to address those.
But this goes on. The 100.
If the board would like for us to go ahead and look at
Per
that,
meeting room goes on.
if the board would like for us to look into that more to see how that came to be, we're happy to do so. But otherwise, that's not
I
subject.
think that if we're going to go ahead and pass this today, I think this is something that needs to be actively looked at in the future because it doesn't work.
From what you're saying, the city's already identified that there's a parking problem.
Oh, yeah.
When there's high-profile events.
Okay.
Correct.
Otherwise, you think that the way this is written, it is adequate for days like today? I mean, I know the public's not allowed today, but on an average day, we don't utilize all our parking.
We don't. No, it's, the parking lot's not at full capacity as much as when we do have those high-profile events.
Okay.
So, and maybe 2 or 3 times, or when we have a workshop that's hosted here. But obviously, I think if we know that there's going to be an event where they're going to have a high occupancy, we could also evaluate other options to hold that event elsewhere where there might be adequate facilities
Okay, and
available.
like Mr. Sims said, who do we need to notify to get the information to the law enforcement, to the deputies, that we need somebody over there as well until we get this rectified?
I can go ahead and coordinate with city administration to communicate your concerns.
And this is outside of our scope of the board. I know that,
It's okay, but it's a
But that was-
concern, so we appreciate.
and he's looking out for the health and well-being of people crossing. So if you could do that, which isn't your responsibility, we'd really appreciate it.
No problem.
Thank you.
That's it.
Anybody else?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
So again, this would just be a motion to recommend or for consistency with the comp plan.
I'll make that motion.
I'll second it.
All in favor?
Aye. Public,
Yep, okay.
public?
Well, the public's not, any public comment? There is some public comment, okay.
On the next item.
Good morning. My name is Laura Gibson. I'm the environmental specialist for the Community Development Department. And I have prepared some amendments to our dock and shoreline code. And I have a brief presentation that goes over the major changes, or we can go to questions, however you would like. Do that.
For the presentation.
Okay. The Dock and Shoreline Structures Code was originally adopted as part of the city's transition land development code in 2000 from Lee County, and staff has identified changes based on recent permit requests and input from dock contractors in the area. Why the changes are needed, or some amendments were done by the city in 2014, so it's been nearly 7 years since we've looked at that. We researched and compared dock and shoreline regulations from other jurisdictions and regulatory agencies, and worked with the city attorney to form the amendments. And we did this in part to, we simplified the text within this article. We're moving all the definitions to the main LDC definitions chapter. We're moving the application requirements straight to the application form. We removed some redundant text where there were repeated or unnecessary references to other code sections and Bonita plan sections, because work must conform to those standards without saying. And it's an example of why changes are needed. We want to clarify areas that constitute the terminal platform of a dock, such as a marginal dock being included. So these large marina-style docks are not built on single-family lots, as in this instance. The main changes that we're making, one of those is about resiliency and flood control. So they focus on allowing seawalls to be raised, because currently new or replacement seawalls are only allowed at their current height or the height of adjacent seawalls for new seawalls. So, and also only artificial canals that already have a 50% of seawalls on those canals can have additional seawalls. So we're removing that requirement to allow seawalls in those canals as well. There's no change to the current regulation of no new seawalls on natural water bodies. DEP and Army Corps still do not permit this, and that's in compliance with our Bonita plan as well. There are other shoreline protection options in those cases, such as riprap and living shorelines, which would be more encouraged, especially within the aquatic preserve. We wanted to clarify dock configuration and square footage over water to match DEP exemption allowances, and allow a combination boat dock facility and fishing pier, because we're finding that uses are differing now versus years past with the functions that people want to have with their docks. We're going to allow for lesser dock side setbacks for lots under 65 feet in width, and allow side setback agreement option for boat canopies. There are many lots under 65 feet and they cannot meet the current 25-foot side setback, but we feel that this still protects view corridors and navigability for boats to get in and out of their slips. And we want to clarify types of structures and encumbrances in narrow canals and in and corner lots, which we have several issues with in those instances. And all of these also have these category of changes also allow administrative deviations if they can meet those requirements for the deviation. And we're also trying to protect water quality and aquatic life. The Estero Bay tributaries, the Imperial River and Spring Creek, are designated other outstanding Florida waters, and they're also impaired waters by the Florida Department of Environmental Protection. And so we feel like these additional standards will protect the quality of life for neighborhood in terms of dredging projects, turbidity, and nutrient uptake with vegetation. And we intend to work with Estero Bay Aquatic Preserve staff to determine where and when benthic surveys are needed. And there are lots of FGCU resources to do that as well. And it still doesn't make any changes to allowing vegetation removal for docking facilities. That is in concert with the state statutes, as well as allowing mangrove and vegetation removal in artificial canals for seawalls too. And just a reminder, this is the city is in pink. Estero Bay is the hatching over the water. It's hard to see, but it extends partially up the Imperial River and down Spring Creek. Enjoyed by fishermen, boaters, kayakers, and tourists, and home to federally listed manatees, which eat seagrass, and that's important for them, and lots of other species that live there too, and small-toothed sawfish as well. And I did receive some positive feedback from Nelson Marine Contracting, it's our former mayor too. He did bring up a couple of points that we want to work on before the final adoption of this too. But I'm open for questions if you have any.
Anything?
And we do have some public here that want for this item.
Rex? Gentlemen?
I have a question. Is there any requirement in regards to the vessel size in relation to the dock size?
We don't currently get involved in that. That it is really up to the owner and the contractor they're using to be aware of the depths of where they're storing the dock and how to get out. The one restriction that may affect that is that they cannot go past 25% of the waterway width where they are. So that could impact the size of the boat.
Requirement, I think.
Yeah, that's really the only thing we look at in regards to that.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Public comment on that?
Good morning. For the record, I'm Brent Stokes, owner of Stokes Marine, local marine construction company. Done some work in this area and surrounding municipalities for close to 20 years now. I applaud the staff's effort for looking into the codes and making attempts to improve them, especially if it's been 20 years since that was done so, or some slight modifications in 2014. My concern is with the impact of some of the proposed changes. I think there's a fair amount of room for making sure that these proposed changes are not further impacting or restricting the residents from requests that we receive on a daily basis for what they're looking for in their docks, whether it's the square footage, whether it's the side setback, whether it's the number of slips, etc. And there's some proposals in here with relation to increasing side setbacks on some artificial waterways that I'd be opposed to. There's some square footage requirements in here, 500 feet and 1,000 feet on different projects that I'd be opposed to, especially considering that that includes any canopies or boat covers, which are a common request. It's hard to build a dock that's practical for a boat with some of these limitations that are in here. There's some spots I'd like to see some clarification on differentiating between natural waterways and artificial waterways. The codes for quite some time, if not indefinitely, have been different for waterways that are artificial versus waterways that are natural, and for good reason. But what I sense here in some of these proposed changes is more of a generic grouping of all waterways versus keeping that differentiation and keeping that separation, and specifically having different requirements for those different water bodies. There's some specifics on some of the definitions with seawalls, things of that nature that we can get into now or at a different time, differentiating between seawalls and retaining walls and some of the code changes and impacts that has. But the bottom line is I'm all for updating the codes. I'm all for some of the simplicity and taking out some of the duplicate language. I just don't want to see a restriction on the size of the docks or the number of slips that can be there over and above the restrictions that are in place now or already in place by state and federal agencies that limit us from having anything greater than that anyway. We have to have approval from government on all three levels before we can put these docks in. So I don't know that we want our local code to be more extreme than the state and federal code, especially if part of the intent for staff in the situation was to have some consistency across the agencies. So,
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
City Attorney,
Yes.
can she address some of his concerns?
I would say let's wait till we have all the public comment in, because that way it
we-
might just be more
Okay, duplicate what we do.
streamlined.
Okay.
Morning, members of the local planning agency. I'm Joe Mazurkowitz, president of BJM Consulting, here in my role as the government affairs director for the Southwest Florida Marine Industry Association. After having 38 years in local government, both as an elected official and member of an LPA, two different LPAs, and consulting in local government issues, I want to talk about, my comments are in the realm of public policy comments. I am not an attorney. I do not give legal advice. With regard to the proposed changes, we support, the marine industry supports the flexibility of raising seawalls to adjust and recognize the effect of sea level rise. We support the flexibility for small lots. allowing them to get the best use of their limited waterfront. And we are as concerned as the previous speaker about differentiating, or the need to differentiate between natural and artificial water bodies, and the need to recognize there's two different type of amenities, if you will, to the adjoining property. One was built with specificity to provide entitlements and amenities to the process built by the developers in many cases, and the other was created long before we were here and developers were a thing. What I would like to just put in your minds is, as you look at new land development regulations, is that you consider the status quo, where we are now, as the limitations of what are entitlements to all the adjoining properties. As you are entitled today, that is under the protection of the Florida Constitution and the U.S. Constitution, and very heavily supported in the state of Florida, are property rights. And any adjustments to those that could be perceived or conceived to be a reduction in that access to both either the water or the enjoyment of the water could be construed as a reduction in a partial regulatory taking. So just as you go forward, make sure that you keep that in mind, that there are times when it is good public policy to reduce those accesses and to reduce those property rights. But when you do for a good public purpose, there is also the possibility of having to remunerate the people you are taking that right from. So just keep that in mind as you're going forward. We in the marine industry, South Florida Marine Industry Associations support staff's recognition of the need to update these codes from time to time, and we stand ready to work with them as they continue to go through this and present it to the City Council for adoption. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Any other comment? Okay, seeing that there's none, we're going to hear from John.
Morning. Yeah, let's make a quick statement. We are open and available. I've already passed out one card. I'll pass out other cards. If there are written comments, there's specific concerns, obviously we'll take those into consideration. Our goal here is to move our dock ordinance forward. There's a lot of areas where common sense is not applied, and there's a lot of areas that have rules that really no longer apply to current construction techniques. And we're looking to bring this to a place where we recognize how docks are constructed today, the environment in which they're being constructed, while still producing the results that the City Council is looking for. If there are areas from those that are in the industry can point out to us where we could provide additional information or a little more clarity, we're all ears. I have no issues with that. There are going to be some things, I would just imagine, with any type of regulation or legislation where we're probably not going to see eye to eye, but I don't think that's going to either make or break the entire ordinance. So, you know, God willing, we have a couple of conversations, and most of the issues that have been brought to you, maybe not specifically, but generally today, are taken care of prior to the City Council meeting. So we're not opposed to a discussion, and we're definitely not opposed to making some changes between now and the council meeting.
Okay, thank you, sir.
I have a question of John. John?
Yes, sir.
Prior to your presentation of the changes, were either of the two speakers in contact with you? And when you were the staff in regards to these potential changes?
It's my understanding, they were not in direct contact with me. They were in contact with the staff, and as I understand it, there were general discussions. I don't know if specific information was exchanged. However, at this point, I've personally invited them to send me an email if they've got something written up where there's a concern, and we'll take care of it. I don't know what's happened to date. I know that there have been conversations, though.
And is there any consideration to grandfathering anybody in?
Well, you always have a legal nonconforming status for docks where rules have changed. And we have processes in place to address those. But right now, I know of 3 docks that were constructed in a way that actually apply common sense in a very unique portion of a canal, that the way that they were constructed, they can't have their final inspection yet. So some of the changes that are in here today would allow those docks to be inspected and finalized. So changes made in the field prevented them from being finalized. And that's one of my major concerns with this particular ordinance. I know that everybody has a different perspective depending on where you come from and what your job is. and we'll try to take care of that as we go forward. That's all I can promise.
Okay.
I'll just add that the children of Lee County, and that would be Sanibel, Bonita Springs, Fort Myers Beach, have each tried to address the county's dock code in their own ways, and the county itself has amended those codes, and it is not an easy thing to start changing a code, specifically something where there's a lot of oversight with like the DEP. And so it is kind of an incrementalist approach. The changes that have been brought on have been really brought on because of field conditions where there's been things, as John pointed out, that were being done that made sense to be done. And then once we got in there and started conducting the open heart surgery on the code, we start changing other things that also make sense. So really, this is a code that the changes are not being driven by the city to impose new restrictions. It's more to clean up and clarify things. And so staff is really looking for comments from the industry to say, this would be better, this would not be better. I don't think none of the changes that have gone through have really been intended to address restricting rights or uses. Really, when I went through the code changes myself, there were a lot of things that just didn't make sense. And they didn't make sense when they were in Lee County, and they don't make sense in other codes.
You answered one of my questions. Are these changes more restrictive in nature? But you're saying they're not.
They may be more restrictive in nature with respect to additional a specific instance, but we did not come at this with the intent of restricting. So it was not like many of our codes where we say there's an issue out there, we're trying to solve the issue and fix it. This is something that we're really just trying to clean it up.
I have a question for John.
Could I just continue on that for 1 second, Rex? I think the most important thing is that we're learning from this, and every other one that presented, is that staff must listen to the users. Sometimes the users are right. Sometimes the users are very definitely wrong. But you have to listen.
That's exactly right. I mean, I can't substitute my experience for somebody that actually builds docks for a living. They can't substitute their experience for somebody that's got to review dock permits for a living. So there's perspectives that all need to be addressed.
My question, or statement here, this revision is quite extensive. This goes on page after page after page of strikeout, and so it's not just a casual thing. This is a very major change in the dock and shoreline structures. So what we do today is going to create probably the biggest revision that we've had in this since we wrote the thing 20 years ago or so.
It would be bigger than that, because when you revised it, you made really no revision. You basically took the Lee County ordinance and adopted it as your own. You made some moderate tweaks several years ago, but that's been the biggest attempt to date. This will be bigger than that.
Okay.
I think we as a board, I feel comfortable speaking for everybody, are grateful that you're willing to listen, and we'll be meeting with them and hear their concerns.
Mm-hmm. Yes, sir.
So thank you. No further comment?
No, again, this one would just be looking at it for consistency with the comp plan.
I'll make a motion to proceed forward.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Deb, when is the next meeting?
If there is one, July 8th, I'm not sure yet.
Two quick comments.
Go ahead,
Do
please.
we need general public comments?
For the record, I'd just like to put two comments in and one request. One, it's a great new building, and a building that really needed a lot of work to it. And Matt Feeney and his staff and the subs did a great job, and hopefully, as time continues, any additional needs would be added to it. Second thing, I'd like to thank John and his staff and everybody else for what I consider to be, and only less than a year on this committee, very professional presentation, both in writing and in verbally, so I appreciate that. The only request I have, we've reviewed a number of developments in the past year, most of which the city fathers have approved. I think one that I can remember that they disapproved. Is there some way we can get an update of our decisions versus what the final decision was on a continuum basis? I'd like to know what's happening in the city, what we addressed, and what is actually happening. Can that be done?
Unless there's an objection, we place an item on the agenda that would outline whatever the city council has most recently voted on that may have been something that has gone through this committee, and maybe a brief update on their discussion.
I know I'd appreciate that.
Yes, you can also see their discussion by viewing city council meetings.
I know that, but
We can, would you like that at the beginning or would you like it at the end? Would you want it when you're tired or do you want it first thing?
Yeah, I just don't want to make more work for you guys.
Yeah,
So
But I would look at this,
give him an
it
update.
doesn't have to be voluminous.
I would look at this
Don't expect
as,
another 700-page presentation. This is what happened, this is why it happened.
if
2
board members want to see what happened and listen to discussion, that's perfectly available. If you would like a brief verbal recap from us when we start off the meetings, I'm happy to do that. And just simply state that the,
Way too nice, John. And I want to add to this comment, I will be hosting a remedial Roman numeral identification class, since obviously I don't know them. So I want everybody to attend that.
Romans are gone, we don't need to worry about
No,
that.
I haven't been worried about it. That's it.
I move we approve the minutes for
I'll
April
second it.
22nd.
I'll second it. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Thank you for coming, everyone. Great presentation, fantastic job. Thank you to everybody. Meeting's adjourned. I'll see you unless we hear differently on July 8th.
July 8th.
July 8th. Thank you. See what you got yourself into, Jeff?